The frozen wind cut through Melody Zimmerman's threadbare coat like 1,000 tiny knives, and she stumbled against the splintered fence post, certain that her final moments had arrived on this desolate stretch of trail between Carson City and Virginia City, Nevada, in the bitter January of 1878. Her horse had thrown a shoe 3 miles back, then spooked at something in the brush and bolted, leaving her stranded as the winter storm descended from the Sierra Nevada mountains with merciless fury. The landscape had transformed from beautiful to deadly in less than an hour, the snow now falling so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves, and her legs trembled with exhaustion and cold. She had been trying to reach her aunt's boarding house in Virginia City after her father's death left her with nothing but debts in Carson City. But now it seemed she would join him in the grave far sooner than expected. Melody sank to her knees in the mounting snow, her vision blurring. She was only 22 years old, too young to die alone on this forsaken road, but the cold was wrapping around her like a shroud. Her eyelids grew heavy despite her desperate attempts to stay alert. She had heard the stories of people freezing to death, how they simply fell asleep and never woke again. Part of her wanted to fight, but her body was giving up, surrendering to the inevitable. Through the howling wind, she thought she heard something. A voice, perhaps, or maybe just her mind playing tricks as consciousness began to slip away. Then she felt strong hands gripping her shoulders, lifting her, and a deep voice cut through the storm's roar. "I'll fight the cold for you." She forced her eyes open and saw a figure towering above her, a man bundled in a heavy sheepskin coat and wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow. His face was mostly obscured by a thick scarf, but his eyes were visible, intense and determined in the dying light. "Can you walk?" he shouted over the wind. Melody tried to respond, but her jaw was too stiff from the cold. She managed a weak shake of her head. Without another word, the stranger scooped her into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all and began moving through the storm with purposeful strides. She wanted to ask where he was taking her, wanted to know who he was, but the words would not come. Instead, she let her head rest against his chest, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth that seemed to radiate even through the layers of clothing. Time became meaningless as he carried her through the blizzard. She drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of his face when the wind shifted the scarf, seeing the determined set of his jaw, the way his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. He never faltered, never slowed, moving with the confidence of a man who knew these mountains and refused to let them claim another victim. Eventually, through her haze, she saw a structure materializing from the white chaos. A cabin, small but solid, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. The stranger kicked the door open and carried her inside, and the wave of warmth that hit her was almost painful after the brutal cold. He set her down gently on a chair near the fireplace, then immediately began working to remove her frozen outer garments with practiced efficiency. "We need to get you warm, but not too fast," he said, his voice now clear without the wind to compete against. It was a good voice, deep and steady with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. "Too quick and it can do more harm than good. What's your name?" "Melody," she managed through chattering teeth. "Melody Zimmerman." "Melody," he repeated, pulling off her soaked gloves to reveal her dangerously pale fingers. "I'm Quentin Garrett. You're lucky I was checking my trap line when the storm hit, or I would have been further up the mountain. Can you feel your fingers and toes?" She tried to concentrate, but everything felt distant and strange. "I don't know. I can't tell." Quentin's expression grew more serious. He began rubbing her hands between his own, generating friction and warmth. His hands were large and rough with calluses, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Stay with me, Melody. Don't close your eyes yet. I need you to stay awake for a while." "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I know, but you need to fight it a little longer. Here, drink this." He pressed a tin cup of lukewarm water to her lips, helping her take small sips. "Not too much at once, just enough to get your system working again." As the minutes passed, and the warmth of the cabin began to penetrate her frozen body, Melody became more aware of her surroundings and her rescuer. The cabin was sparse but well maintained, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs, a neatly made bed in the corner, and shelves lined with supplies. Animal pelts hung from the rafters, and she realized Quentin must be a trapper working the high country. Quentin himself was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 29, with dark brown hair that fell past his collar and a strong, angular face marked by several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were a striking hazel, more green than brown in the firelight, and they held an intensity that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with her near-death experience. He noticed her studying him and gave her a small smile. "Feeling better?" "Yes, thank you." "You saved my life." The words felt inadequate for what he had done, plucking her from the jaws of death itself. "What were you doing out there alone in weather like this?" he asked, sitting back on his heels as he continued to work, feeling back into her extremities. Melody explained about her father's death, the debts that had forced her to sell everything they owned, and her desperate journey to reach her aunt's boarding house in Virginia City, where she hoped to find work. "I thought I could make it before the storm got too bad. I was foolish." "You didn't know these mountains," Quentin said without judgment. "They can turn on you faster than a rattlesnake. That storm came down from the high peaks with barely any warning. Even folks who have lived here for years got caught by surprise." He stood and moved to the stove, ladling something from a pot into a bowl. "You need to eat something warm. It's just rabbit stew, nothing fancy, but it will help." The stew was simple but delicious, and Melody ate slowly, savoring both the warmth and the flavor. She had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. Quentin sat across from her at the table, nursing his own bowl and watching her with an expression that was hard to read. "The storm is going to last through the night at least," he said finally. "Maybe into tomorrow. You will have to stay here until it passes and the roads are clear enough to travel safely." Melody felt a flush of embarrassment. "I don't want to impose on you any more than I already have. It's not an imposition, it's survival. You go back out there, you will die. Simple as that." His bluntness was not cruel, just matter of fact. "You can have the bed, I will sleep by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You can and you will," Quentin said firmly. "You nearly froze to death. You need proper rest and warmth. I have slept by the fire plenty of times." It's no hardship. There was no point in arguing with him. Melody could see that Quentin Garrett was the kind of man who, once he made a decision, would not be swayed. It was a stubbornness that had likely saved both their lives tonight, so she decided to be grateful rather than argumentative. As the evening wore on, they talked more easily. Quentin told her about coming to Nevada 5 years earlier from Texas, looking for gold like so many others, but finding his fortune instead in trapping and hunting. "The mountains provide if you know how to listen to them," he said. "I have a good life up here. It's solitary, but I prefer that to the noise and crowds of the cities." "Don't you ever get lonely?" Melody asked, genuinely curious. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Sometimes. But lonely is better than being around people who don't understand you or want something from you. Up here, things are honest. An animal is trying to survive, same as you. There's no deception in it." Melody sensed pain behind his words, some hurt that had driven him into these mountains years ago. She wanted to ask more but did not want to pry. Instead, she told him about growing up in Carson City, about her mother who had died when she was 12, and her father who had tried his best but never quite recovered from losing his wife. He was a carpenter, a good one, but after Mother died, he started drinking. The work became less reliable and the debts piled up. I tried to help by taking in sewing and laundry, but it was never enough. What about your aunt in Virginia City? Is she expecting you? I sent a letter 2 weeks ago, but I don't know if she received it. We have not been close since Mother died. There was some kind of disagreement between her and my father that I never fully understood. But she is the only family I have left, and I am hoping she will at least give me a chance to prove I can earn my keep. Quentin nodded thoughtfully. Virginia City is a rough town, but there are opportunities for someone willing to work hard. Your aunt runs a boarding house, you said. Yes, the Silver Star. Do you know it? I've heard of it. Respectable place from what I understand, better than some of the establishments in that town. He stood and added another log to the fire. You should get some sleep. Tomorrow we will see what the weather looks like and make plans from there. Melody was indeed exhausted, her body aching from the ordeal and the lingering cold. She made her way to the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable with thick wool blankets and a feather pillow. As she settled in, she watched Quentin arrange his bedroll by the fire, his movements economical and practiced. She felt safe with him, which was strange considering she had only just met him. But there was something solid and trustworthy about Quentin Garrett, something that made her believe he was exactly the kind of man who would fight the cold for a stranger. She drifted off to sleep with the sound of the wind howling outside and the crackle of the fire, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things would work out after all. Morning came with a strange brightness that made Melody squint as she opened her eyes. It took her a moment to remember where she was, and then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She sat up quickly, looking around the cabin. Quentin was at the stove, cooking something that smelled wonderful, and sunlight was streaming through the small window. "The storm passed," he said without turning around, somehow sensing she was awake. "Left about 2 feet of fresh snow, but the sky is clear now." Melody rose and went to the window, gasping at the sight outside. The world had been transformed into a pristine wonderland of white, the trees heavy with snow, the mountains in the distance gleaming in the morning sun. It was breathtakingly beautiful and also a stark reminder of how deadly it had been just hours before. "How are you feeling?" Quentin asked, setting a plate of fried salt pork and cornbread on the table. "Much better, thanks to you." She joined him at the table, suddenly shy in the morning light. He looked different by day, more handsome somehow, and she was acutely aware of her appearance after sleeping in her clothes and having no way to properly fix her hair. If Quentin noticed her dishevelment, he did not show it. He ate his breakfast efficiently, then stood and began gathering supplies. "The main road will be impassable for at least another day, maybe 2. But I know a route that will get us to Virginia City by late afternoon if we start soon. It's longer but more sheltered, and the snow will not be as deep." "Us?" Melody repeated. "You didn't think I was going to let you continue alone, did you?" He gave her a look that was almost amused. "I will take you to your aunt's boarding house myself. Make sure you arrive safely. But your trapline, your work, can wait. The animals are not going anywhere, and I already checked my traps yesterday before the storm hit. Besides," he added more softly, "I won't have your death on my conscience because I was too worried about a few pelts." Melody felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you, Quentin. I don't know how I will ever repay you." No repayment necessary. Just promise me you will be more careful about checking the weather before you travel in the mountains." She smiled. "I promise." Within an hour they were ready to depart. Quentin had saddled his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, and fashioned a way for both of them to ride together. Melody sat in front of him, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins, and she tried not to think about how close they were, how she could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back. The journey through the snow-covered landscape was slow but steady. Quentin clearly knew these mountains intimately, guiding Copper along paths that were barely visible to Melody's untrained eye. He pointed out landmarks as they went, teaching her to read the terrain so she would not get lost again. "See that rock formation that looks like a finger pointing? That's Sentinel Rock. If you can see that, you are about 5 miles southeast of Virginia City. And that notch in the ridgeline, that's Devil's Gateway. The wind comes through there like a freight train, so you never want to be near it during a storm." Melody absorbed everything he said, fascinated by his knowledge and the way he spoke about the land with such respect and understanding. In town, she had known merchants and tradesmen, men who understood business and civilization. But Quentin was different, more connected to something primal and essential. He was a man who could survive in conditions that would kill most others, and there was something deeply attractive about that strength and competence. They stopped at midday to rest Copper and eat some of the jerky and hardtack Quentin had packed. They sat on a fallen log that he brushed clear of snow, looking out over a valley that stretched white and pristine below them. "It's beautiful up here," Melody said softly. "I never appreciated it before. I was always so focused on the difficulties of mountain life, the cold and the isolation. But there's a kind of peace here, isn't there?" "There is," Quentin agreed. "It's one of the reasons I stay. In town, there's always noise, always someone wanting something or judging you for not being what they think you should be. Up here, you can just be yourself. The mountains don't care about your past or your mistakes. They just ask that you respect them and learn their ways." "What brought you here, really?" Melody asked gently. "You said you came looking for gold, but I sense there was more to it than that." Quentin was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though he was deciding whether to answer. Finally, he said, "I was engaged once, back in Texas. Girl I had known since childhood. Everyone expected us to marry, and I thought I loved her. Thought she loved me too. But a month before the wedding, I found out she had been carrying on with my brother. They ran off together, and the scandal destroyed my family. My parents blamed me for not being man enough to keep her. My other siblings took sides, and the whole thing tore us apart. So I left. Figured I would start fresh somewhere no one knew me or cared about the Garrett family drama." "I'm so sorry," Melody said, her heart aching for the pain in his voice. "It was a long time ago," Quentin said, but she could tell the wound still hurt. "I'm over her. Hell, I realized pretty quick that if she could do that, she wasn't worth mourning. But the betrayal, the way my own family turned on me, that took longer to get past. Still working on it, I guess." "Their loss," Melody said firmly. "You're a good man, Quentin Garrett. Anyone who can't see that is a fool." He turned to look at her, surprise and something else flickering in his hazel eyes. "You don't even know me. I know you rode through a blizzard to save a stranger. I know you gave up your bed and are now taking 2 days away from your livelihood to make sure I reach safety. That tells me plenty about the kind of man you are." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious expression into something warm and almost boyish. "Well, when you put it that way, I suppose I do sound pretty heroic." Melody laughed, and the sound seemed to ring out across the snowy valley. It felt good to laugh, something she had not done much of in recent months. Quentin laughed too, and the moment felt perfect, suspended in time like the snowflakes that still clung to the pine branches around them. They continued their journey, and as the afternoon wore on, Virginia City began to appear in the distance. It was larger than Carson City, a bustling mining town built on the side of Mount Davidson, with buildings climbing up the steep slopes in haphazard fashion. Smoke rose from hundreds of chimneys, and even from a distance, Melody could hear the sounds of industry, the stamp mills crushing ore, the shouts of men, the general chaos of a town built on the hopes of silver strikes. Quentin guided Copper down the main street, which was packed with snow and churned to a muddy slush by countless feet and wheels. Men in rough mining clothes jostled alongside well-dressed gentlemen, and women in various degrees of respectability hurried along the wooden sidewalks. The Silver Star boarding house was on a side street, a two-story building with a fresh coat of white paint and green shutters that looked well-maintained compared to some of its neighbors. Quentin dismounted first, then helped Melody down. She stood for a moment, suddenly nervous about what would happen next. Would her aunt welcome her? Would there be work available? And what about Quentin? Would this be the last time she saw him? As if reading her thoughts, Quentin said, "I will come in with you, make sure everything is all right with your aunt." They climbed the steps to the front porch, and Melody knocked on the door. It was opened moments later by a woman in her late 40s with graying dark hair pinned in a neat bun and Melody's mother's eyes. Those eyes widened in shock. "Melody, is that really you?" "Hello, Aunt Catherine. I wrote to you about coming, but I was not sure if you received my letter." Catherine Zimmerman looked between Melody and Quentin, taking in their travel-worn appearance and the way Quentin stood slightly protective at Melody's shoulder. "I got no letter, but it doesn't matter. Come in, both of you. You look half frozen." The interior of the boarding house was warm and welcoming, with a large parlor to the left where several guests sat reading or conversing, and a dining room to the right where the smell of cooking food made Melody's stomach growl despite the jerky they had eaten earlier. Catherine ushered them into a small private sitting room and bustled off to get coffee and food. "She seems kind," Quentin observed, settling into a chair. "She looks so much like my mother," Melody said, her voice catching slightly. "I had almost forgotten." Catherine returned with a tray laden with coffee, sandwiches, and pie. She sat down and fixed Melody with a penetrating stare. "Now, tell me everything. Your father, the letter you mentioned, and how you ended up here with this young man." Melody explained it all, from her father's death to the storm to Quentin's rescue. Catherine listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to horror when she heard about Melody's near death on the mountain road. "Foolish girl, traveling alone in winter," Catherine said, but her tone was more relieved than angry. She turned to Quentin. "And you, young man, I owe you a debt I can never repay. You saved my niece's life." "Just did what anyone would do, madam," Quentin said, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "No, not anyone. Most people would have stayed safely inside their own homes and never known she was out there. You went looking." Catherine studied him with the same penetrating gaze she had turned on Melody. "You're welcome to stay the night free of charge. It's the least I can do." "That's generous of you, madam, but I should be getting back to my cabin. In the dark, after making such a long journey already today." Catherine shook her head. "I insist. Besides, I want to hear more about this rescue from you. Melody always was modest about herself, probably won't tell me half of what really happened." Quentin looked at Melody, who gave him an encouraging nod. "All right, madam. I accept your kind offer." "Thank you." Catherine showed Quentin to a room on the second floor, then took Melody to a smaller room at the back of the house. "This was going to be a storage room, but we can fix it up nice for you. It's not much, but it's private and warm." "It's perfect," Melody said, meaning it. After the past few weeks of uncertainty, having any space to call her own felt like a luxury. "We will talk more tomorrow about what work you can do here," Catherine said, pausing at the door. "But Melody, I want you to know, I'm glad you came. I'm sorry about your father. We had our differences, but he was a good man deep down, and he loved you very much." "Thank you, Aunt Catherine." That evening, Catherine insisted they all have dinner together in the private dining room she reserved for family. The food was simple but abundant, and the conversation flowed easily. Catherine was a natural storyteller, regaling them with tales of the various characters who had stayed at her boarding house over the years. Quentin contributed his own stories of mountain life, and Melody found herself laughing more than she had in months. After dinner, Catherine excused herself to see to her other guests, leaving Melody and Quentin alone. They moved to the parlor, sitting near the fire and talking in low voices so as not to disturb the other guests. "Your aunt seems like a fine woman," Quentin said. "I think you will be happy here." "I think so too," Melody agreed. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "Will you come visit? You said you come to town sometimes for supplies." Quentin's expression softened. "I would like that if you want me to." "I do," Melody said simply. "Very much." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Melody felt a sense of contentment she had not experienced in a long time, and she realized with a start that it had everything to do with the man sitting beside her. In just 2 days, Quentin Garrett had become important to her in a way she could not fully explain. It was more than gratitude for the rescue, though that was certainly part of it. It was the way he listened when she spoke, the kindness in his eyes, the strength that was tempered with gentleness. "I should turn in," Quentin said finally, standing and stretching. "Early start tomorrow if I want to get back to my cabin before dark." Melody stood as well, not wanting the evening to end but knowing it must. "Thank you again for everything." "Stop thanking me," Quentin said with a smile. "You're going to give me a swelled head." She laughed, and then, on impulse, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek. It was a brief, innocent gesture, but she felt him go still, felt the sharp intake of his breath. When she pulled back, his eyes were darker, more intense. "Good night, Melody," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Good night, Quentin." The next morning came too quickly. Melody helped Catherine prepare breakfast for the boarders, and Quentin ate quickly, clearly eager to get back to his mountain. But when it came time to leave, he hesitated at the door, turning back to look at Melody. "I will come back in 2 weeks," he said. "Need to bring my pelts to town to sell anyway. Maybe we could have dinner if you are free." Melody's heart soared. "I would like that very much." He nodded, settling his hat on his head. 2 weeks, then. You take care of yourself. You too, be safe up there." She watched from the porch as he mounted Copper and rode away, not going back inside until he had disappeared around the corner. Catherine came to stand beside her, a knowing smile on her face. "He's a good one, that Quentin Garrett." "Yes, he is," Melody agreed softly. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Catherine put Melody to work immediately, and Melody threw herself into her tasks with determination. She cleaned rooms, helped cook meals, did laundry, mended linens, and assisted with the endless administrative tasks that came with running a boarding house. She found she enjoyed the work, especially interacting with the various guests who came and went. Each person had a story, and Melody discovered she had a talent for making people feel welcome and comfortable. Catherine was a fair employer and a generous relative. She paid Melody a small wage beyond room and board and taught her the intricacies of managing a business. "Someday this will be yours," she said one evening as they sat doing the account books together. "I have no children of my own, and you are the closest thing to a daughter I will ever have. I want you to know how to run this place properly." Melody was touched and overwhelmed by the offer. It represented security and a future, things she had not dared to dream about just weeks before. But even as she learned and worked and began to build a new life, her thoughts kept returning to Quentin. She wondered what he was doing up in his mountain cabin, whether he thought of her as often as she thought of him, whether 2 weeks felt as long to him as it did to her. Finally, on the 14th day, she was helping Catherine prepare dinner when there was a knock at the door. Her heart jumped, and she had to force herself to walk calmly to answer it rather than run. When she opened the door and saw Quentin standing there, cleaned up and dressed in his best clothes with his hat in his hands, she felt her face break into a wide smile. "Hello, Melody." "Hello, Quentin." "Come in." He stepped inside and Catherine appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Quentin, good to see you again. Melody has talked of nothing but your pending visit for days now." "Aunt Catherine," Melody exclaimed, mortified. Quentin grinned. "Is that so? Well, I'm flattered. I thought about the visit quite a bit myself." "Why don't you two go have dinner at the hotel restaurant?" Catherine suggested. "My treat." She pressed some money into Melody's hand before she could protest. "Go on, you have been working hard. You deserve an evening out." The restaurant at the International Hotel was the finest in Virginia City, with white tablecloths, real china, and waiters in formal attire. Melody felt underdressed in her simple blue dress, but Quentin looked at her as though she was the most beautiful woman in the room. Over dinner, they caught up on the past 2 weeks. Quentin told her about returning to his trap line and finding that several of his traps had been successful. "Got some prime beaver pelts. Should fetch a good price. I sold them to the trading post this afternoon." Melody told him about settling into life at the boarding house, about the various guests and their stories, about Catherine's generosity and her growing confidence in her new role. "I feel like I'm finally building something, you know. After so much loss, it's good to be creating something positive." "I'm glad," Quentin said sincerely. "You deserve happiness and security." As they talked, Melody found herself studying his face, memorizing the details. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes, the way his mouth curved when he was amused. She was falling for him, she realized. Maybe had already fallen. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. After dinner, they walked through the town, bundled against the cold but enjoying the crisp night air. The streets were quieter at this hour, most of the miners having retreated to saloons or homes. Quentin offered his arm and Melody took it, enjoying the solid warmth of him beside her. "Can I tell you something?" Quentin said as they walked. "Of course." "These past 2 weeks, up on the mountain alone, I couldn't stop thinking about you. I kept remembering the way you laughed, the sound of your voice, the feel of you in my arms when I carried you through the storm." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel something here, Melody, something real. Do you feel it too?" Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Yes, I feel it too." "I want to court you proper," Quentin said. "I know my life is not easy living up in the mountains the way I do. And I know you are just getting settled here with your aunt, but I want to see where this goes between us, if you are willing." "I'm willing," Melody said, smiling up at him. "Very willing." Quentin's answering smile was brilliant. He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands and leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not want to. When his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and perfect, a kiss full of promise and hope. Over the following months, Quentin became a regular fixture in Virginia City and at the Silver Star boarding house. He would come to town every 2 weeks, sometimes more often if his trap line was doing well, and each visit he would spend as much time as possible with Melody. They went on picnics when the weather allowed, took walks through the town, attended church services together, and spent countless hours just talking. Catherine approved heartily of the courtship, telling Melody privately that Quentin was exactly the kind of man she would have chosen for her niece. He's steady and honest, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. Those are the important things. As winter gave way to spring and spring to summer, Melody's feelings for Quentin deepened into something profound and unshakable. She loved his quiet strength, his dry humor, his respect for the natural world. She loved the way he treated her as an equal, always asking her opinions and listening to her thoughts. She loved how safe she felt with him, how he made her laugh, how his kisses made her forget everything else. Quentin was equally smitten. He told her one evening in July as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple that she had changed his life. "I thought I was content alone up there," he said, his arm around her shoulders. "I thought I didn't need anyone, that I was better off without the complications of relationships and feelings. But you showed me I was just hiding. You made me want to be part of the world again, to connect with someone. You made me remember what it feels like to hope." "You saved my life that day in the storm," Melody said softly. "But you have done so much more than that. You have given me a reason to truly live, not just survive. I love you, Quentin Garrett." It was the first time she had said the words, and she felt him tense beside her. Then he turned her to face him, his eyes bright with emotion. "I love you too, Melody Zimmerman. I think I have from the moment I found you in that snowstorm, so determined to fight even when you thought it was hopeless." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we have not been courting for very long by conventional standards, but I'm not a conventional man, and these are not conventional times. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Melody's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Inside the box was a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Quentin slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. From inside the boarding house, Melody heard Catherine's delighted squeal and realized her aunt had been watching through the window. She started to pull away, embarrassed, but Quentin held her close. "Let her watch," he murmured against her lips. "Let the whole world watch, I don't care. I just want you." They were married in September of 1878, in a simple ceremony at the Virginia City Church with Catherine and a handful of friends in attendance. Melody wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Quentin had picked from the mountain meadows. She had never seen him look more handsome than he did standing at the altar in his best suit, his eyes locked on her as she walked down the aisle. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Quentin kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Melody felt her heart might burst from happiness. This man, this wonderful man who had fought the cold for her, who had refused to let her die alone on a frozen mountain, was now her husband. The question of where they would live had been a topic of much discussion. Quentin's cabin was too small and too remote for Melody to live there year-round, especially with her responsibilities to Catherine and the boarding house. But Quentin also could not give up his trapping entirely, as it was his livelihood. They came to a compromise that satisfied everyone. They would spend spring and summer at the boarding house, where Quentin could help with maintenance and heavy work while Melody assisted Catherine. In fall and winter, when the trapping was best, they would live in the cabin, coming to town every few weeks for supplies and to check on Catherine. "It's not a conventional arrangement," Quentin admitted. "But then, we are not conventional people." "I think it's perfect," Melody said. "I get the best of both worlds. Time in town with Aunt Catherine and the stimulation of the boarding house, and time in the mountains with you in the peace and beauty of the wilderness. Their first months of marriage were blissful. They settled into their life together easily, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Quentin proved to be an excellent handyman around the boarding house, fixing everything from leaky pipes to squeaky doors to a loose board on the porch that had been troublesome for months. The guests liked him, especially when he would tell stories of mountain life in the evenings, and Catherine treated him like the son she never had. When October came, and it was time to move to the cabin for the trapping season, Melody was both excited and nervous. She had never lived so remotely before, and though she had visited the cabin several times during their courtship, living there was different. But Quentin had spent the summer months improving and expanding the cabin, adding a small addition that served as a proper bedroom and installing better windows to let in more light. "I want you to be comfortable," he said, as he showed her the improvements. "I want this to feel like home, not like you are roughing it." Melody was touched by the effort he had put in. The cabin was still simple, but it was cozy and well built, and there was something deeply romantic about being snowed in with her husband, far from the rest of the world. They fell into a rhythm quickly. Quentin would check his trap line each day, and Melody would handle the domestic tasks, cooking and cleaning and managing their supplies. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Quentin often working on repairing equipment or preparing pelts, while Melody sewed or read aloud from one of the books they had brought with them. One evening in late November, as the first major snowstorm of the season raged outside, Melody set down her book and watched Quentin work. He was concentrating on stretching a beaver pelt on a frame, his movements practiced and sure. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the slight furrow of concentration between his brows. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. He looked up, surprised. "Regret what, marrying me?" "Taking on the responsibility of a wife when you were content alone before." Quentin set down his work and crossed to where she sat, kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his. "Melody, I have never regretted anything less in my entire life. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Every day I wake up grateful that I decided to check my trap line that day, that I was in the right place at the right time to find you. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "What's that?" she asked softly. "The ability to trust, to hope, to love without fear. After what happened in Texas, I built walls around my heart. I told myself I was better off alone, that needing people only led to pain. But you broke through those walls like they were made of paper. You made me remember that love is worth the risk." Tears spilled down Melody's cheeks, and she pulled him up to sit beside her, wrapping her arms around him. "I love you so much. Sometimes it scares me how much." "I know," he murmured, holding her close. "I feel the same way, but it's a good kind of fear, I think. The kind that reminds us how precious this is, what we have together." They made love that night with the storm howling outside, the wind rattling the shutters and snow piling against the cabin walls. But inside they were warm and safe in each other's arms, creating their own shelter against the cold. Winter passed in a beautiful isolation. There were hard days, certainly, when the cold was bitter and the work was exhausting, when supplies ran low and they had to be creative with meals. But there were far more good days, days of laughter and love and simple contentment. Melody learned to read the mountains the way Quentin did, to predict the weather from the behavior of animals and the feel of the air. She learned to skin rabbits and prepare pelts, to snowshoe through the drifts, to bake bread in the cabin's small stove. By the time spring arrived and they returned to Virginia City, Melody felt she had truly become a mountain woman, capable and strong in ways she had never imagined possible. Catherine noticed the change immediately, commenting on how confident and glowing Melody looked. "Marriage agrees with you," she said with a knowing smile. "And mountain life too, it seems." The pattern they had established that first year continued. Springs and summers in town, falls and winters in the mountains. Over time, they made improvements to both arrangements. At the boarding house, they converted a large storage room into a private suite for themselves, giving them more space and privacy. At the cabin, Quentin built an addition that included a small root cellar and a better stove, making their winter stays more comfortable. In the spring of 1880, Melody discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She was excited to become a mother but worried about the logistics. Where would they be when the baby came? What if something went wrong in the remote cabin? Quentin was thrilled but also concerned. "We will plan it out," he assured her. "Figure out the timing. Make sure you are in town with Catherine and close to the doctor when your time comes. I won't let anything happen to you or our baby." They worked out that the baby would likely arrive in late November. Quentin decided they would stay in town that fall and winter, giving up a season of trapping to ensure Melody had the best care possible. It was a financial sacrifice, but he did not hesitate. "No amount of money is worth risking you," he said firmly when Melody protested. "We have savings. We will be fine. And there are plenty of jobs I can do in town over the winter to bring in income." True to his word, Quentin found work as a carpenter, using skills he had learned from his father back in Texas. The work was steady and paid well, and he was able to be close to Melody as her pregnancy progressed. Their son was born on a cold November evening, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the entire boarding house. Quentin held Melody's hand through the whole ordeal, refusing to leave her side despite the midwife's suggestions that he wait elsewhere. When the baby was finally placed in Melody's arms, Quentin looked at his wife and newborn son with such wonder and love that Melody started crying all over again. "We made that," he said in an awed whisper. "We made a whole person." They named him Thomas after Melody's father and called him Tommy. He was a healthy, happy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's hazel eyes. Quentin proved to be a devoted father, walking Tommy around when he was fussy, singing him old cowboy songs, holding him for hours just to watch him sleep. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler to young boy, he thrived in the unique life his parents had created. He spent springs and summers helping his mother at the boarding house, charming the guests with his bright smile and endless energy. He spent falls and winters in the mountain cabin with both parents, learning to read animal tracks in the snow, to help stretch pelts, to appreciate the wild beauty of the Sierra Nevada. In 1883, a daughter joined the family, a beautiful girl they named Rose for her pink complexion and rosebud mouth. She was quieter than Tommy had been, more thoughtful and observant, but just as loved. Quentin built cribs and toys. Melody sewed clothes and blankets, and Catherine spoiled both children outrageously whenever they were in town. The years passed in a happy blur of family life and hard work. The boarding house continued to thrive under Catherine's management with Melody's help, and Quentin's reputation as both a trapper and a carpenter grew. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and content, rich in the things that truly mattered. In 1887, when Tommy was 7 and Rose was 4, tragedy struck. Catherine took ill with pneumonia, and despite the doctor's best efforts, she passed away within a week. Melody was devastated by the loss of the aunt who had been more like a mother to her, and Quentin held her through her grief, offering what comfort he could. Catherine left the boarding house to Melody, as she had always said she would. It came with responsibilities and challenges, but also security for their family. They decided to modify their arrangement again. Quentin would still trap in the winters, but only for 2 or 3 months at a time, with regular trips back to town. The rest of the year he would be in Virginia City full-time, helping Melody run the boarding house and raise the children. "It's time to adapt," he said pragmatically. "The kids are getting older, need more stability and schooling. And you need help managing the boarding house now that Catherine is gone. The mountains will always be there. They will understand." Melody was grateful for his willingness to change, to sacrifice something he loved for the good of their family. But she also made sure he still had time for the wilderness he loved, encouraging him to take the children on camping trips in the summer, to teach them the skills he had learned over years in the mountains. Tommy, in particular, took to wilderness life like a duck to water. By the time he was 10, he could set a trap, skin a rabbit, and navigate by the stars. He talked constantly of becoming a mountain man like his father, and Quentin would smile and say, "There's time for you to decide, son. World is changing. Might be different opportunities by the time you are grown." Rose was less interested in trapping and hunting, but she loved the beauty of the mountains and had an artist's eye for the landscape. Melody taught her to draw and paint, and Rose would spend hours creating pictures of the mountains, the wildlife, the wildflowers that bloomed in the meadows. As the children grew, so did the boarding house's success. Melody proved to be an excellent businesswoman, expanding services and maintaining the high standards Catherine had established. The Silver Star became known as one of the best places to stay in Virginia City, clean and comfortable with good food and friendly service. Quentin took pride in his wife's accomplishments, never threatened by her success or trying to control her decisions. He worked alongside her as an equal partner, handling maintenance and security, dealing with difficult guests when necessary, and supporting her choices even when he might have done things differently. "You have a good head for this," he told her one evening as they reviewed the account books together. "Better than mine. I'm glad this is your domain." "It's our domain," Melody corrected. "Everything we have built, we built together." In 1892, when Tommy was 12 and Rose was 9, the family took a trip back to the cabin where Melody and Quentin had spent their first winter together. The children had visited before, but this time felt different, more nostalgic. The cabin was smaller than Melody remembered, more rustic, but still solid and well-built. "This is where you and Pa spent your first winter as husband and wife?" Tommy asked, exploring the small space. "It is," Melody confirmed. "Some of the happiest days of my life were spent in this cabin." That night, after the children were asleep, Melody and Quentin sat outside under the stars, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill. "You remember the night I found you?" Quentin asked softly. "Every detail," Melody said. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then suddenly there you were, like an answer to a prayer I had not even had time to say. I remember you saying you would fight the cold for me." "Best decision I ever made," Quentin said, pulling her closer. "Fighting for you, fighting for us. I never properly thanked you for that, you know, for saving my life. You have thanked me every day since by being my wife, by building this life with me, by giving me children and love and purpose. I'm the one who should be thanking you." Melody turned in his arms to look at him. Even after 14 years of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip. There was more gray in his hair now, more lines around his eyes, but he was still her Quentin, still the man who had carried her through a blizzard and into a future she could never have imagined. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after, you are my everything, Melody Garrett." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of some small creature in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the pines. This place, these mountains, they were where their story had begun, where a dying woman and a solitary man had found each other against all odds. The mountains had tested them, sheltered them, and witnessed their love story from its dramatic beginning to this moment of quiet contentment. The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and unexpected. Virginia City's mining boom began to slow, and the town's population decreased as people left for new opportunities elsewhere. But the boarding house remained successful, sustained by its reputation and by Melody's adaptability. She began offering longer-term accommodations for people working in the area, and the Silver Star became less a boarding house for transients and more a residential hotel for working people who wanted something better than the rough mining camps. Tommy, true to his childhood dreams, chose a life in the mountains. At 18, he left to work as a guide and hunter, eventually starting his own outfitting business that took wealthy clients on hunting and fishing expeditions. He married at 23, a practical young woman named Sarah who shared his love of the wilderness, and they built their own cabin not far from Quentin's original one. Rose surprised everyone by showing a talent for business. She took over much of the boarding house's operations, implementing modern ideas and efficiencies that increased profits. She married at 21 to a banker's son who respected her intelligence and independence, and they settled in Virginia City, becoming pillars of the community. As Quentin and Melody entered their 50s, they found themselves with more free time than they had had in decades. The children were grown and settled, the boarding house was in Rose's capable hands, and Quentin had retired from trapping, his body no longer able to handle the brutal winters in the mountains. They began taking trips together, visiting places they had always wanted to see. They went to San Francisco and marveled at the ocean. They traveled to Denver and saw how much the West had changed since their youth. But they always came back to Virginia City and the mountains that had brought them together. In 1898, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised Melody with a journey to the spot where he had found her that long-ago winter night. It was summer now, and the place that had been a frozen hellscape was now a meadow full of wildflowers, humming with bees and butterflies. "I wanted to come back here with you," Quentin said, taking her hand as they stood in the middle of the meadow. "To remember and to be grateful. This place, this exact spot, it gave me everything. It gave me you." Melody looked around, trying to reconcile the beauty before her with the deadly storm she remembered. "It's hard to believe this is the same place. It looks so peaceful, so gentle." "That's the mountains for you," Quentin said. "They can be brutal and beautiful, sometimes in the same breath. But they are always honest. They don't pretend to be anything other than what they are." "Like you," Melody said, squeezing his hand. "You are the most honest man I have ever known, Quentin Garrett. You have never pretended to be anything other than exactly who you are, and that's one of the many reasons I love you." They spent the day in the meadow, picnicking and reminiscing, sharing stories and memories, laughing about the challenges they had faced and overcome. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Quentin pulled Melody into his arms and kissed her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. 20 years, he murmured against her lips, "and I love you more now than I did then." "I did not think that was possible, but here we are." "Here we are," Melody echoed. "Still standing, still together, still in love." They returned to Virginia City as the stars began to emerge, driving their wagon slowly through the mountains in no hurry to end the perfect day. The town was quiet when they arrived, most people already in for the night, and they made their way to the boarding house and up to their private rooms. That night, as Melody lay in bed with Quentin's arms around her, she reflected on the strange and wonderful journey her life had taken. She had come to Nevada alone and terrified, running from debt and grief, nearly dying on a frozen mountain road. But that near death had led to life, real life, fuller and richer than she could have ever imagined. She had found love, purpose, family, and home, all because a cowboy had refused to let the cold take her. The years continued to be kind to them. They became grandparents multiple times over, Tommy and Sarah having 3 children, Rose and her husband having 2. The boarding house continued to operate successfully, and Quentin found a new purpose in mentoring young men interested in wilderness skills, teaching them the respect for nature that had guided his own life. They grew old together gracefully, their love only deepening with time. They still took walks through the mountains when weather and health permitted, still sat together by the fire in the evenings, still held hands like newlyweds. Their friends and family often remarked on how lucky they were, what a rare thing it was to see a couple so clearly devoted after so many years together. "It's not luck," Quentin would say when anyone mentioned it. "It's choice. We choose each other every day. We chose love over fear, partnership over independence, together over apart. That's not luck. That's work and will and wanting it enough to fight for it." In the spring of 1905, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Melody leaned her head on Quentin's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked, his arm coming around her automatically. "Everything and nothing," Melody said. "How grateful I am. How blessed. How impossible it seems that the terrified girl who almost froze to death became this happy old woman." "You were never just a terrified girl," Quentin said. "Even then, even at your lowest moment, you had strength. You were still fighting when I found you. That's what made me determined to save you, that spark of will that refused to give up." "You saw that in me?" Melody asked, surprised. "I did. Still see it. It's one of the things I love most about you, that core of steel wrapped in softness." They watched the children play, Tommy's youngest boy chasing Rose's daughter around a tree while the other grandchildren cheered them on. The afternoon sun was warm but not hot, a perfect spring day in the mountains. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not found me that day?" Melody asked. "If you had checked your trap line an hour earlier or later, if you had gone a different direction." "I try not to," Quentin admitted. "The thought of you dying alone on that mountain, of never knowing you, never having this life with you, it's too painful to contemplate. I prefer to focus on the fact that I did find you, that we did get this life together. That's what matters." "You are right," Melody agreed. "What matters is what happened, not what might have been." As evening approached and the grandchildren were called in for supper, Melody and Quentin remained on the porch, reluctant to end the beautiful day. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic in the fading light, and Melody felt a rush of affection for them. These mountains had almost killed her, but they had also given her everything. They had tested her and forged her into someone stronger. They had provided for her family through Quentin's trapping. They had been the backdrop to the greatest love story she could have imagined. "Thank you," she whispered to the mountains, to fate, to whatever force had brought her and Quentin together that long-ago winter day. "What was that?" Quentin asked. "Just saying thank you," Melody said. "For all of this. For you." Quentin pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "The gratitude is mutual, my love. The gratitude is definitely mutual." They sat together until the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their courtship, their wedding, their life together. And as they finally rose to go inside, hand in hand as always, Melody thought about how fitting it was that their story had begun with Quentin's promise to fight the cold for her. Because that was exactly what he had done, every day since. He had fought for her, fought for them, fought for the life they had built together. Not just against physical cold, but against doubt and fear and all the challenges that life had thrown their way. And she had fought too, right alongside him. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would outlive them in the children and grandchildren who carried their love forward into the future. The cold had tried to take her that winter day in 1878, but a cowboy had appeared with a promise and a will of iron. And that promise had become a lifetime of love, of partnership, of choosing each other every single day. As they entered the warm, bright house full of family and laughter and love, Melody knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single thing about her life, not even the terrifying moment when she had thought she would die alone in the snow. Because that moment had led to this, to everything that mattered, and that made it all worthwhile. The winter of their lives was as beautiful as the spring had been, filled with love and family and contentment. They continued to live in Virginia City, surrounded by their growing family, respected and cherished by the community they had been part of for so many years. Quentin's health remained good well into his 70s, and Melody matched him stride for stride, her mind sharp and her spirit undimmed. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, with a party that brought together family and friends from all over Nevada. Tommy came down from his mountain home with Sarah and their grown children. Rose organized the entire event with her characteristic efficiency, transforming the boarding house into a beautiful venue decorated with flowers and ribbons. The couple's many friends from throughout the years came to pay tribute to a marriage that had become legendary in Virginia City for its love and longevity. During the party, their grandson asked Quentin to tell the story of how he and Melody had met. It was a story the family had heard many times, but they never tired of it. Quentin looked at Melody, his eyes still sparkling with the same love they had held that first night, and began to speak. "It was the worst storm I had ever seen in these mountains," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "The kind of storm that makes you grateful for solid walls and a warm fire. I was heading back to my cabin after checking my trap line when I saw something that did not look right, a shape that should not have been there beside the trail. I went to investigate, and I found your grandmother, nearly frozen, moments from death." He paused, and Melody picked up the story, her voice warm with emotion. "I was so cold I could not speak, could not even think clearly anymore. I thought I was dying. And then this man appeared out of nowhere, lifted me like I weighed nothing at all, and said the words that changed my life forever. He said, 'I'll fight the cold for you.' And I did," Quentin continued, taking Melody's hand. "I carried her to my cabin, got her warm, made sure she survived. It was supposed to be a simple rescue, just doing what any decent person would do. But when I looked into her eyes that night by the firelight, I knew my life had changed. I knew I had found something precious that I did not even know I was looking for. We fell in love," Melody said softly. "Slowly at first, then all at once, the way love sometimes works. And every day since, your grandfather has kept his promise. He has fought for me, for us, for our family. Not against cold anymore, but against everything else life throws at you. And I have fought for him too, because that is what love is. It is choosing to fight for each other, every single day." There was not a dry eye in the room when they finished the story. Their children and grandchildren looked at them with admiration and love, and their friends raised glasses in toast to a love that had endured for 4 decades. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Melody and Quentin found themselves alone on the porch once more, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky. 40 years, Melody marveled. How is it possible that it has been 40 years? It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. The best 40 years of my life, Quentin said. Every single day with you has been a gift, Melody. Even the hard days, the sad days, the days when nothing went right, because we faced them together, and that made all the difference. I love you, Melody said, the words as true and powerful as the first time she had spoken them. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Quentin replied, pulling her into his arms. My brave, beautiful Melody. The woman who was strong enough to fight a blizzard and wise enough to let herself be saved. They stood together under the stars, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life of love and meaning. The cold that had threatened to take Melody all those years ago had instead brought her the greatest gift imaginable, a love that had sustained her through every joy and sorrow, a partnership that had created a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. As they finally went inside, their hands still clasped together the way they would remain until their final days, Melody thought about how fitting it was that their story had begun with a promise whispered in a blizzard. Because that promise had been kept every day since, in big ways and small, in actions and words and the simple act of choosing love over and over again. The cowboy had fought the cold for her, and in doing so, he had given her a life more wonderful than she ever could have imagined. And she, in turn, had given him the family and love he thought he had lost forever. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages, set against the wild and beautiful backdrop of the Nevada mountains they both cherished. And when they finally passed, years later within months of each other as longtime couples sometimes do, they left behind a legacy of love that lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the boarding house that still bore the Silver Star name, in the stories told around fires of the cowboy and the woman he saved from the cold. Their love had conquered winter's worst fury and emerged stronger, a testament to the power of choosing love, of fighting for what matters, of finding light even in the darkest and coldest of moments.